Join me for a conversation with writer and editor Jonathan Oliver.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. Hey guys, I have another incredible interview coming right up. But first, if you like this podcast, please consider supporting the show in some way. Like, rate, review, or subscribe to it wherever you are listening to the show. Those things help the show immensely, and I could really use your help. Also, if you have the means, you can support the show financially at patreon.com/dicegeeks. All right, guys, now enough with all that stuff. Here's the interview. My guest today is the author of the recently published The Language of Beasts, as well as an editor with more than 15 years experience editing science fiction and fantasy and horror. He is also the editor of my new novel, The Spaceport Gambit. Jonathan Oliver. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
You know, I just want to kind of go back a little bit. What really made you want to be a writer?
I think just growing up in a house full of books, you know, my parents are both pretty academic. My father's a retired minister and a theologian. My mother is a psychiatrist, and books have always been a massive part of our life. I was read to as a child. Stories were always important. Obviously, growing up in the church with a theologian father, stories are extra important in biblical sense. And so, yeah, I was always into books and reading, and I think I started telling stories at school, writing them, that is, not just telling lies. And I always knew I wanted to work in publishing and with stories, so I've been, you know, kind of noodling away at writing for most of my life to varying levels of success. I've done a couple of pulp sword and sorcery novels previous to this collection, The Language of Beasts. I'm a terribly, terribly slow writer and terribly undisciplined as well. I will have big gaps where I don't do writing, but I'm always working with words because I'm an editor, and, you know, I'm always working with fiction. Yeah. So it's just being surrounded by books and stories, and you know, they're the best things. So.
Yeah, I agree. But then you also play tabletop role-playing games as well, right?
Yeah, I came to that hobby fairly late compared to my buddies. So I started properly tabletop role-playing when I did my master's degree at university, and I really got into it because I'm a fan of H.P. Lovecraft, and my friend told me, oh, there's a game called, he was telling me about this game he was playing called Call of Cthulhu. And I was like, there's a game based on this? That's wild. So I have to try that. So I joined the Gaming Society when I did my MA at Reading University. And that's where I met my, you know, the guys who have been the core gaming group for years now. And yeah, we meet up at the moment virtually every week to do tabletop role playing. We've done all sorts of things, from huge long D&D campaigns to shorter things. We've just finished a little Pathfinder Goblins quest, which was quite fun. We recently played the new Aliens RPG, which is really good fun and horrible in a good way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's part of my downtime. You know, I really enjoy gaming, and you know, those friendships I've made through it. You know, they're my closest friends. You know, we see each other all the time. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, and I just find that fascinating because it's just always interesting to see that. And I don't know which comes first. I kind of asked my guest this, but I usually find that people who play tabletop role playing games want to be writers, or or is it people who play tabletop role playing games want to, I don't know which one comes first.
It definitely influenced the two sword and sorcery novels I did. The two big influences behind them were the stories of Fritz Leiber, the Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser stories, which I adore, although some of them haven't aged particularly well, it must be said. And, playing D&D with my buddies, so there was a lot of kind of that went into the novel. In fact, I put my gaming group in there. I made them guards and then gave them horrible deaths. So... which seemed apt.
Yeah, that is funny. So, so you worked your gaming group in and then killed them off. That's nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that is nice. But now, you are, also you're an editor as well. And so you've been doing that for quite a long time. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that as well?
So, I began in 2001 in academic publishing, believe it or not, which I was in for 5 years. It turned out to be good because I met my wife through that. But I've always been a science fiction fan and a horror fan. I was always on the lookout for ways to get into fiction publishing. So the chance came along to join Rebellion as the head of a new imprint they were doing called Abaddon Books, which was kind of pulpy fantasy. It was a shared worlds concept, so we would think up the sort of books we wanted to publish, and we put together world bibles and say, well, we want to do a fantasy series. We think this is roughly the setting, and then we go and find authors. So I was doing that for quite a while, and Abaddon Books is still going. And then while I was at Rebellion, I was also the graphic novels editor for 2000 AD. So I did Judge Dredd graphic novels and things like that for 5 years there, which was great fun because I grew up with 2000 AD as well. And then Solaris came along, which was Games Workshop's imprint at the time, but they decided to sell it. And that was a much more traditional publishing format, as in it was all author owned. It wasn't linked to any gaming IP or anything like that. So I started to broaden my remit there and publish all sorts of people. And, I had a much bigger field to play in. So, I commissioned people like Yoon-Ha Lee, who's gone on to even bigger things, which is fantastic. Al Ewing, who now writes for Marvel, all sorts of great people. So I was doing that for ages. I was at Rebellion for 13 years. Then I decided I'd want to try something new. The thing I decided to try, the new thing, was religious nonfiction, which was a bit of a weird sidestep, and it didn't work out remotely well.
Oh, no.
So I stuck that out for 2 years before I made the decision to go freelance, and I decided, fiction was really where my heart lay, especially science fiction, fantasy. So I was a bit scared because it was, I was on my, going on my own for the first time, but within a week I had my first client, and then it's just, it's kind of gone from there, and it's gone, it's always busy at the moment, which is great. So, and I get to work with all sorts of authors, yourself included, and across fantasy, science fiction, horror. I'm working with a lot of newer authors, which is really good because I really enjoy helping kind of beginning authors find their feet. And I was doing a lot of that with Abaddon Books. Back in the day, we were employing a lot of first-time writers. So it's, it's back to what I love and being my own boss, which is ideal. So
yeah, no, that sounds fantastic. And I do want to kind of ask, I think, being an editor and reading so many books and even a wide variety, even into, Judge Dredd graphic novels and things like that. Since reading so many books like that, what are some things that you have learned from seeing, so many different authors and so many different, books and even like graphic novels?
What have I learned? It's such a broad question.
Oh, sorry.
No, not at all. It's just trying to pluck pearls of wisdom from the years.
I could narrow it down a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Maybe from maybe from a story structure point of view.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I think, narrative is very much what I'm about. Obviously, I've got all the, the copy editing, proofing skills, etc., grammar and syntax. But what essentially my job is to help people tell the best story they can. And so, having reading as much as possible and widely, not just in the genre, gives you a broader sense of what's out there. So when you're approaching a new manuscript or by a new writer, you might say, you'll have a certain feel for what's gone before and what's out there presently. So you use some of that kind of historical sense and commercial sense to help them, tell a story that is going to be their story and true to them. And also, if they're looking to get published, you want to give some advice on whether you think this might not work for a commercial publisher, this might be a bit niche, etc. It, there are so many different stories, and reading all the time. I read for pleasure as well as all day for work. So I stop work, then I read some more books. Yeah. So I'm constantly immersed in stories. So I hope that's what I know.
Okay. Yeah. And I know that sounds like a dream to some people. They to get to read and then yes, to get to read all day for work and then read all day for pleasure as well. All evening for pleasure. But yeah, and I was just trying to try to get a sense, and I know it was a broad question, but just trying to get a sense of just different things that that you would have picked up from experiencing so much, because I think sometimes, right, like that if a person only reads narrowly, right, that will affect their writing, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And you do see sometimes influences come strongly through. So sometimes you'll see something that's very Brandon Sanderson, and it's like he's one of the biggest authors out there at the moment. And of course, people are. He's a really good writer. He's a great. He's great at narrative structure and great at consistency of world. And I think we all learn to write through imitation. My field really is horror, and Stephen King, Ramsey Campbell, those guys, huge influence on me. So I'm sure my early stuff, and I know my early stuff tends towards the sort of, it feels a little bit kind of 80s depressing British horror type stuff. So there's nothing wrong with a little imitation as you start. You want to make sure that people aren't being too derivative, but there are things in genre that are shared that people enjoy. There's nothing wrong, I think, with a well-told, a well-told story that's full of the usual tropes, as long as it's well-told and enjoyable. There's nothing wrong with straightforward, straight down the line, sword and sorcery, but when I was a commissioning editor, I was also looking for something new. That was, always the thing, is looking for the next new thing. So yeah, you certainly see people's influences, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as it's integrated. Just trying to get my cat to stop walking on the keyboard.
Oh gosh, they're prone to do that.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, and I know what you're saying there too, because I think it would have been years ago or decades ago now that when I would read something new and I would write something as a reaction to it. And then, if I happen to dig kind of an old manuscript or paper or an old file, open one up and I'll see it and I'll be like, oh, I was just writing basically that. I was just imitating, beyond like influencing me. Yeah. I was just copying it or just writing, trying to imitate the style exactly or something.
And that's how we learn. And I mean, bear in mind there are lots of people who write fan fiction. There are lots of good people who write good fan fiction, and that's a shared world. That's a way to have fun and play in a safe environment while learning the skills. So it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think when I got into trouble is when I thought that was going to make me famous or something, right?
Sure. I think, if you set out to write because you think it's going to be the way to fame and fortune, then it's hostage to fortune, really, isn't it? It's so hard to make a living as a writer. I mean, if you just look at the raw statistics of what the average writer makes at the moment, it's less than minimum wage here in the UK. There are exceptions, like J.K. Rowling, but there are folk like George Martin as well. George R.R. Martin was writing pretty much mid-list fantasy science fiction for quite a long time. He was known, but he wasn't like the superstar he is now. So you can make a living out of writing. You can do it. It's hard, and a lot of the writers who do it well are quite adaptable. They do a lot of different things for a lot of different people. They wear various hats. But the important thing is with writing is that you enjoy it and you get something out of it, and you do it because you really love it, and that will come through in a good writer. Whereas if you have something that is written to market, which I very rarely see, 99% of my clients are very much fans and love what they're doing, but very occasionally you'll get pitched something they're like, yeah, I know exactly what you're doing with this, and you can see it's a little soulless and a little kind of it might be well structured, but you've read 800 of these books this year already. So yeah, there's various approaches. Yeah
and and just thinking of that too, like reading so many books and so many things, do you tend to see like things that kind of follow like similar trends and things like that quite a bit?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think the majority of what I get at the moment is fantasy. That is the majority of what I was being sent when I was a commissioning editor. Mm-hmm. But, when I was a commissioning editor at Solaris and Abaddon, we did do fantasy, and that was an important part of it, but it's not all I did. Mm-hmm. It is a commercial genre. It can be a commercial genre. But it's a really noisy one, as in there's lots of it out there at the moment. So it's hard to get noticed as a new writer. So, sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought there. What was the question again?
Just do you see certain trends as people are, as you're reading things that have been submitted to you and things like that?
Yeah, well, it's a bit different now because I'm not a commissioning editor. Sure. So I'm not reading something with a view to would I buy this. Mm-hmm. I do give a steer to authors sometimes if I come across something that's really good. You say I'm not a commissioning editor, but if I were a commissioning editor, this is the sort of thing I would like. So you can give them a steer on how commercial you think it is, or how much a chance it has with another commissioning editor. The trends seem, I don't know, they're broadly similar to when I was in commissioning. What we're seeing a lot of now, which is really good, is a lot more diversity and a lot more of a range, and we're seeing a bigger range of authors welcomed to the party, which is fantastic, which we're all, as commissioning editors, I think we were all trying to push for that for a while. So to see that start to bear a bit more fruit is good.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess just back when you were a commissioning editor, were there, I don't want to test you too much, but just in case there's somebody out there who's submitting fiction to some different places, were there like one or two just like glaring mistakes that people made when they were submitting something?
Most of the time, the submissions were coming through agent. So the agent had seen it and made sure it was up to snuff, as it were, in terms of submitting to us. When I started Abaddon, I had an open submissions policy. So I had a huge slush pile, like a massive one. I can remember the piles of paper on my desk. And I used to print everything out back in the day because I'm old. It does seem years ago now. Yeah. So, I think one of the main things, if you are putting something out on submission, is it's a simple thing really, but make it look neat. Don't set it in 15-point Comic Sans and multicolored. Not that people do that, but I think, it's the basic stuff really. It's make it neat, make it, put it through a spell check your grammar, all the usual things. Make sure your contact details are on it. You'd be surprised by how many people didn't do that. Oh man. Be polite as well when you're approaching a commissioning editor. Not like groveling, but don't say, here is my thing. It is the best thing ever, and if you don't buy it, you're stupid. And if you get, we all try to give a bit of constructive criticism on rejections, and it's best just to take that and move on. It very rarely happened, but occasionally you get an author going, but why? When you're like, because it wasn't for me. It's time to move on. Try somebody else. I'm not going to engage further in this. Because we're all very busy people. But so I think, the glaring errors are just the obvious ones that we'll know whether it's for us once we start reading the story. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. It is a shame to hear that many people leave their contact information off.
Not many, but I've seen it. I've seen it before. Okay. Right. Yeah. And quite. Yeah,
that's pretty. Yeah. That's unfortunate. But I think 2 years ago, I was in a position to read a lot of screenplays, and I was reading lots and lots of screenplays, and I kind of got to the point to where I could read a title and know that it was going to be, kind of like a hard read, let's say.
Sure. Yeah. You develop your instincts, and I would say when I was a commissioning editor, I'd know within the first 50 pages whether it was a goer or not. If I got past the first 50 pages, chance was I was going to read the whole thing. And because I had quite a lot to read, often you don't want to read 360 pages of something just to reject it. So if something hasn't really grabbed you within at least a couple of hours of reading, then it's probably not for you. But always try to give constructive criticism and feedback. Always, if I felt that the problem was that the manuscript just wasn't for me, but it was good, then, the genre community is a friendly community. We all know each other. So I'd suggest it to a different publisher, and different publishers did it to me. So there's an author called Gareth L. Powell who wrote the Akak Macaque trilogy for me. He's a brilliant science fiction writer. He's now gone on to do bigger things, but I remember his novel was with a different publisher, and the editor at that approached me at a convention and said, we've been sent this novel. Unfortunately, we're not going to take it on, but I think you'll really like it. Do you want to take a look at it? So we did, and we published Gareth Powell, and that's been a good journey for him, because he's gone on, for book after book, he's really developed. So it's we're not, commissioning editors aren't there to want to reject people, but then again, we've only got a certain amount of slots to fill. But so we try and be as nice as possible, I hope.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. I got my fair share of rejections back in the day when I used to submit stuff. But
sure.
As I always say, they were terrible. So I look at some of them, probably around that time, 01 or something, and I think, I actually sent that to another human being and made them read that. Why would I do that to somebody? Sure. But but anyway, of course, now in freelance editing, I have subjected you to my my current writing, and you edited my first novel, the Spaceport Gambit, and I did want to talk a little about that because when I sent it off to you to be edited, I was kind of expecting you to email me back and say, give up this silly dream and go home. And to which I would say, well, I was already home, but anyway, it's the pandemic. Where was I? Exactly. But you came back with some very kind words about my novel, and
sure, yeah.
And I was very appreciative to your edits and that, and I just wanted to ask a little bit more about it, because you had said that you thought that the narrative structure, I think the word was excellent. So could you maybe give me a little bit more insights? What led you to say it was excellent?
It's a good story, well told. That there wasn't much fat, there wasn't much to trim away, and it was, the pacing was very good. It was straight into the action, and the prose was clear. So it wasn't like I was thrown into a science fictional world and then I had to, sit through pages of exposition about what works and how this, what the setting is, which is, something that newer authors do sometimes. Is, they tell you they're going to tell an exciting story, and then you get 25 pages of council meetings in castles, or kind of description of rural economies, and you're like, great, okay, there's a story here, presumably. So I think with you there's the confidence in the setting, and a desire to the structure of the story. It came across that you'd had it clear, you knew where you wanted to go, and you hit the right beats. Sometimes authors, especially when you're talking fantasy, which tend to be big manuscripts, sometimes they go off on tangents or get a little lost, and sometimes you have to say, you could probably lose this bit, or have you thought of switching the focus? Whereas yours was, you had a focused, punchy novel, which didn't outstay its welcome. It was fun to read from beginning to end.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for the kind words. Because like I said, I was expecting something different, but
sure. I don't hold back either, because I had a client recently. I was like, I was expecting red pen everywhere, and you to tell me it's terrible. I was like, no, what you've got here is actually a solid, well-structured fantasy novel. It's good. It needs a little bit of work, as you can see from my notes, but trust me, if I think you should make loads of cuts, I will make loads of cuts in my development edit. I will show where those cuts lie. So sometimes, it's, especially newer authors, they can be a bit nervous that they haven't, nailed some things, but sometimes they have. And, if you've got a good thing going, then, continue that momentum.
Yeah. And I think it's just always difficult to sometimes to really be a judge of our own writing.
No, absolutely. No, we're terrible judges of our own writing, and it is really hard to get distance from your own writing, especially because you spend so much bloody time with the thing, staring at it and reading it again and again and again and again. And by the time you're done with it, you're like, you don't know whether it works. You don't know what you send it off to the editor again. I don't know what this is, but presumably it's something. I've had that experience myself, absolutely.
Because you also, like, I think people fall into kind of two camps. Some people will think what they've written is, the best since Tolkien. And then some people think theirs is terrible when, unjustifiably like bad or something. They'll think it's terrible that way.
And writers as a whole are not the most confident people sometimes. Yeah. I've worked with writers I adore, and they'll send me as a commissioning editor, they'll send me their book and I'll say, mate, this is the best thing since the last book. And they're like, oh, do you really think so? I'm not sure it really works. No, I'm telling you, this is brilliant. It's like, and sometimes I have to, it's like one of my authors was, I mentioned Al Ewing earlier, who writes for Marvel at the moment. He does, I'm reading his Immortal Hulk at the moment. He's doing Loki, Agent of Asgard, and all sorts of things. And Al started in British comics, and that's how I got to know him. And he wrote a bunch of novels for me for Abaddon Books. And he was one of the writers on my Abaddon roster. I was like, okay, you've done this series now. Do another one, because I always loved his books. So when we got Solaris, the more traditional publishing model, I said, you can write whatever you want for this. Whatever you want, send it to me, and I will definitely, seriously consider it. By that time, I knew how good he was. And he took years. It was like, and then I commissioned him, and then he took even longer, and it was late by about 4 months or something. And I said in my email once I'd read it, I said, I should be really angry because you've taken too bloody long. However, this is one of the best things you've ever written. So, it's like, so. Yeah, but as I say, the self-confidence thing is and I totally sympathise with that. I have, you get confidence. I get confidence issues myself, and writing is a solitary business, and it's often hard to find people to bounce ideas off. Although it's the internet and social media has made writer groups much easier to reach. But there is that terrible. There's always, whenever you send that writing to whomever it is, whether it's a professional editor or if it's a mate, there's always that terrible silence for while they read it, and you're thinking, oh, they're going to hate this. Everybody thinks that.
I have to say I struggled with some of that quite a bit, because this was really the first time that I wrote a novel of this length and really tried to make it coherent. I used to write, I tried my hand years ago at like short stories and then screenplays, and so this was really my first attempt at a novel. So I went through a whole range of emotions, from being like everybody's going to hate it to I'm putting too much of myself into it. I'm not putting enough of myself into it. All kind of this range of motion. And then of course, I get done writing for the day, and I open up, say, like a Clifford Simak short story, I read the first sentence, and I'm like, I can't put two words together. What was I doing? What am I doing?
Oh, there's always that jealousy as well of other writers. Always,
Yeah.
I'm so, but usually it's jealousy and admiration, and then it's like, it's not like you hate these people because they're so good. It's like, oh man, that's great. I've got lots of friends like that who are stupidly talented and successful.
So obviously nowadays, right, like I self-published my role-playing game stuff, and so I went ahead and self-published the Spaceport Gambit, and it is very difficult to do that kind of on your own, but
it is, sure.
But it is interesting to see it kind of come out, and I'm getting some similar feedback, which I find interesting, because and one thing that you had mentioned too was that I used kind of varying lengths of chapters and very short chapters, and I'm getting a lot of feedback that people are saying that was a really good choice to use, like, because some of my chapters are only maybe a paragraph or two long, and then others may be several pages long, and so I really found that to be interesting, that I'm getting a lot of feedback on that.
Yeah, that's good. And self-publishing is so different from when I started, in fiction, whereas it was a bit of the Wild West, really. Kind of print on demand back when I started in publishing was awful. It was, the paper stock was always horribly shiny white. It was always The covers were usually dreadful. Now you can put out, but if you know what you're doing, bear in mind, you have to have the design chops, you have to know how a book's put together, but it's possible to do small runs or even just print on demand runs of really impressive books, and the great thing about print on demand being so good is, I order a book, say I ordered books from it's gone out. My Valancourt, who are a brilliant indie horror publisher. They do beautiful books, and they specialize in sort of forgotten authors, niche authors. I treated myself to their books, and they're based in Canada, but because they're using print on demand, what they do is they confirm the order, and then the files are already on the POD printer, which happens to be in Milton Keynes in the UK. So they click a button, it comes out my end. Well, not far from my end, and is delivered the next day. Brilliant service. And the books look beautiful because they know what they're doing. And KDP and Amazon have really, there's huge amounts of self-published material out there now. It's true, anyone can do it. And so you do see a varying levels of quality out there. But I think there's no reason, and I've edited self-published books, by authors who are like, I'm self-publishing this, and you think, well, you could maybe take a punt and send it out, but they're like, no, I want to self-publish it. And fair play, you want to control the means. And I've been editing self-published books that are as strong as anything I've published, and that's really good. And I would say with self-publishing, you need to establish your platform, know what you're doing, know what books look like and how they're designed. There's a lot that goes into it, but you can learn it and you can do it well. And some self-published authors are, making not a bad living out of it, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with everything you just said there, because and now the novel side is new to me. But doing the tabletop role-playing game books that I do for that, people can use with D&D or Pathfinder, really taught me how to do it. Right. And the first book that I put up on Amazon or on Drive-Thru-RPG, like, you don't want to see it anymore. Right. Like I don't want to look at it anymore, but I figured it out and I learned how to do it, and so that's what I do for a living, right, is the role-playing games. So which is amazing, and that it's even available as an option kind of really blows my mind. But
absolutely, publishing has changed so much, and so there's no longer the focus, although obviously authors want the big publishing deals and the hardbacks and the beautiful books with big companies. Not everyone's going to get that, obviously, but everybody, more or less, if you're really passionate about what you do and you really believe in what you do, there's no reason not to get it out there and build an audience. You can do that, and and the audience will come or not, depending on whether they, what you're putting out is good, or whether the demand is there. So it's a lot more open, and I think really it's traditional publishing has always been sort of, it's always had its difficult times, and but it's adapted. But there's more opportunity out there now for authors, I think. That doesn't mean to say that there's more opportunity to make lots of money. That's not what I'm saying, but there is certainly the opportunity to get your voice out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see people taking a lot of different paths, right? We see,
absolutely.
What is Andy Weir with The Martian, right? But, posting it on his blog and building a following, and then, then turning into something that only happens once or twice, in publishing.
There are those like little lightning in a bottle success stories, like Hugh Howey, who did Wool. I remember listening to a lecture that Hugh Howey did, which was interesting, but I thought he simplified it very much to the anybody can do it. And I know I've just said that, but I did say it still takes work. And there was sort of, there was a feeling a bit with Hugh Howey stuff that this was how it's going to be from now on. People are going to self-publish, and then a huge publisher is going to come along and say, that's brilliant, we'll buy that for lots of money. And it's only happened a couple of times, really. It has happened. E.L. Gray's erotica series, 50 Shades of thing, or whatever. I can't remember.
Yes, Gray.
Gray, yeah. I mean, E.L. James was self-publishing, I think I'm right in saying, Twilight fanfic or something like that.
Yeah.
And, she's become huge through that. But there's still, it's still rare. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, like I alluded to before, kind of, years ago, decades ago when I was younger. And I think I've heard Neil Gaiman say something similar. It's just that, I thought, probably around 1997 or so, when I sent out my short story to Asimov's Science Fiction magazine or something, that had typos in the title, and had a first sentence that began with "there was" or so, or there was in the passive voice or something. As I sent those out, right, like I had some kind of this vision that like they were just going to come and bring me money, and that I was going to be famous. And years, and during that same time, I was trying to, I was going to be a filmmaker as well. And I was making some short movies, and I thought I was going to, send one of my short movies to a festival and have Steven Spielberg, send a helicopter for me, and, pick me up and take me to LA.
There's nothing wrong with having the dreams though, right? So,
well, I've gotten a little bit more realistic, so
sure.
Life will do that to you. But I think the key, though, is kind of what you were saying, there about self-publishing, is that sure, that Andy Weir gets, it was something like a six-figure book deal and a seven-figure movie deal on the same day, and then the 50 Shades of Grey lady, who had huge movies and enjoyed a kind of a really big pop, at least for a little while, of the popularity. There are those, but what self-publishing has actually done is allowed people to make modest incomes by doing the things that they love, by writing books. And I think that sometimes gets overlooked, because if you can make, say, the average salary here in the US writing your own books and publishing, or below average, in fact, writing your own books and publishing them on Amazon, like that's amazing.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That's a good thing to have. And, I think every writer starts with that dream, is I want to make a living out of this, and obviously, like you say, you do have your big aspirations, but that's what gets you creative when you're young. That's what drives you, It's like reading Stephen King as a teenager, thinking, holy shit, just imagine being, this good and this big, and, having movies made, things like that. It's, nothing wrong with that. But and I say there's just so much variety. And I mean, like, folk like, Chuck Tingle, who I've never read, but has become a phenomenon, with his self-published strange science fiction erotica, I want to call it. But, Chuck has become a sort of, he's not only become this kind of, with, titles like, I don't know, I'm sure I'm making this up, but they're similar to like Pounded or something like that.
I haven't heard of those.
But Chuck became, he sort of became notorious for these, and then he started playing little games with the award seasons, and it was very funny. But it's a strange what's out there.
No, and that is true. I mean, it is a little strange what's out there, but I think the idea, though, too, is that even when I put out my novel, I'll get friends and family who will ask me, "Oh, well, how's it doing?" And I'll say, it's okay, not great, because on Amazon, right, you pretty much need a series. You need like
absolutely.
3 books, and so I'm still, I'm starting on the second one now, in that, but like, I think, and even with my role-playing game books too, there's some people, when you tell them, "Oh, how are your books doing, or how are your books, selling or something,"
sure.
and you'll say, "Oh, well, I'm making more than I used to make at my day job," and they're like, "Oh, wow, that's neat." But then there's also a group who's like, "Oh, well, the Spaceport Gambit, you haven't gotten your movie deal yet, so I guess it was total failure," and and I'm like, no, I realize this is, I realize now, I know this is a long game. This was my first try. I'm practicing as much as as anything, and so I think there's a lot of people, not only authors themselves, sometimes have unrealistic or kind of strange ideas kind of connected to some of the creative work that people are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like people have people who don't necessarily read a lot of books, or even have not much knowledge of the publishing world, can assume that, oh, you're a writer, therefore you must be, raking it in, because, their experience might be from the one beach read they read every year, which is the best-selling thing in that, the airport or whatever.
Yeah.
But you say there are a lot more writers than there ever were, and there are a lot more books being published than there ever were. So it's a bit broad.
There's I was at the airport, and there were all these Tom Clancy novels, but I didn't see yours next to it. Right? I get it. Yeah. That's understandable, but yeah, and like you just said there, a lot more books out there, a lot more people writing, and by extension, a lot more people being able to make a living by it, which or even having an outlet that they would not have had before, right? That would have been cost prohibitive of doing your own print run.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I mean, I've not published on Amazon myself. I know there are costs involved, but I gather they're fairly low. So
unless you buy a copy of a book, you can upload and everything for free on KDP. So and if people who are listening for Drive-Thru RPG, where there a lot of the digital PDFs for role-playing games are sold, you can do the same there. You can upload a PDF, no cost.
Well, they've taken books from us before. Drive-Thru RPG. I think they've got some Abaddon titles up there. Back when I was young.
I think they have a sister site called like Drive-Thru Fiction or something like that.
Okay, they've been on my radar for quite a while, because I've ordered stuff through them myself. But they've been on the scene for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and they think they've cornered the market really on like digital role-playing game material.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because there's so much material. I mean, as a Call of Cthulhu player, one of the ones that I always wanted was At the Mountains of Madness. But can you get, why is there not there might be now, but for years there hasn't been a digital copy, affordable digital copy of it. It's like, you could buy it for £250 from this eBay seller. I'm like, can I just I'll pay, £15 or whatever, £20 and download it. I don't want to be illegal and pirate it or anything like that, but it just there's so, like Chaosium, and I presume it's because they've got such a huge backlist, and actually getting the files digitized can be such a headache. I completely sympathize with that, having been a graphic novels editor and having to wade through 4-color film in archives, dusty, horrible archives for scanning purposes. I really sympathize with that. But they've got and lots of publishers are doing this at the moment, especially comics publishers, got such a back, such a wealth of intellectual property and back issues there. Makes sense to make it all available.
Yeah.
Commercially, obviously. GoLanx have done it, science fiction publisher in the UK with the Gateway, where they've got digital rights to a lot of old science fiction books. So these things are not out of print anymore, and they're available. Sorry, that was a complete tangent.
No, and it
Rights.
is it's just a kind of a facet of how the industry is changing, because like you may be able to go on Drive-Thru-RPG and find all of those back titles from Chaosium or I know it might have been 4 years or 5 years ago now, but like Wizards of the Coast dropped a lot of the old D&D titles as digital copies. So they don't have to print them. They can put $10 or $20 on them. And there is a fan base that wants that material.
Absolutely.
And it beats, sitting in a computer or having books getting dusty in a storeroom or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, RPG books are usually quite large formats.
Yeah, absolutely. They're very expensive to print. Yeah.
Yes, they are. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've had you on a long time and we haven't even talked about some of what you've been working on. So your recent book is called The Language of Beasts. Why don't you tell us about that?
So that's a collection of short fiction from about, the last 10 years or so of writing. It's mainly weird and horror because that's sort of what I love. There is a bit of science fiction in there, actually. It was going to be published by Cheezine for a while, but people may know that Cheezine had its issues and I had to buy the rights back. But then I was approached by Black Shuck Books, who'd said to me previously, the owner Steve had said to me previously at a convention, it's great that Cheezine are doing it. I'd have loved to have done it myself. So when I got the rights back, I was like, Steve, would you like to do the book? And he's done a really good job with that. And it's just it's weird. It's weird fiction and horror fiction. It's got a lot of nice write-ups from authors as well in it. Got a lot of support for it, which is great. It's out in hardback currently from Black Shuck Books. There is going to be a paperback soonish, I think. We're talking the end of August. And that means there'll be an ebook as well. So it'll be a much more affordable version. So I see the pre-order. Sorry, I'm just looking at their website. You can now pre-order the paperback for $11.99 English pounds.
All right, this will probably go live in a few weeks, so it'll probably be available.
May even be
already
out by then. Yeah. So it's going to be 26th of August. I didn't even know this. I was just looking at the website. 26th of August is the paperback. As regards what I'm working on now, lockdown's been. Well, we're not in lockdown, so to speak, anymore. But the pandemic obviously has turned everybody's world upside down. My wife lost her job shortly into the pandemic. She's now employed with a different company. I lost my job and became freelance shortly before the pandemic. So I've been focusing on, just getting the freelancing underway and successful. And I've been really busy with that, which is been amazing. It's been a real confidence boost. It does mean that I've been rubbish at finding time to write. I've just been noodling, which is what I usually do. Occasionally things come out. I'm thinking of writing a horror novella and I've made some notes. I was thinking of writing some sort of occult fantasy novel. So something, kind of whatever it would be weird. I've got a few short stories that aren't in this floating out around. So Beyond Death Publishing have done a couple of anthologies. They did a Cthulhu 1816 anthology, and I've done one for that. I wrote a story about the artist J.W. Turner, who's visited by an occultist, as you do. That was really fun to write because I could put little juicy bits of history in there as well as complete batshit crazy stuff. But I really need to get back into the writing. I give writing advice all the time. It's my job, but I really follow it myself. I think much, but But I do want to get back into it. You know, our lives are starting to get, touchwood, slightly easier now. The kids aren't being homeschooled all the time, thank God, because that was a big challenge during lockdown. You know, the kids were here all the time, you know, wanting to be entertained and educated, and I was working as well. So it's craziness. But yeah, no, I'm really pleased with the Language of Beasts. I even got the cover designed as I liked, which, as I know from commissioning editors, if an author says to you, "Oh, thanks for commissioning my novel. I've got a great artist friend of mine who's willing to design the cover," and you're like, "Oh no, oh really, oh no," and I know how that often ends up. So when Steve commissioned this, I said, "You're going to hate this. You're going to hate hearing this, but I really genuinely have a good artist on board for this," because he was my head of design at Solaris, and you know, I was like, I want to use Simon. So yes, Pi Pa did my the beautiful cover. Really pleased with it. It looks gorgeous. Yeah. So it is a handsome thing, and I'm very pleased with it. And I must write more because I like writing. I say I spend most of my days helping other writers, and that's very satisfying. But sometimes then you sit down and want, you know, after you've done that for a full day, you're like, sit down with a blank page or play Xbox. Sit down with a blank page. You know, you kind of, oh, Xbox, you win again.
Oh gosh.
Or you know, there's so much on, you know, so much streaming now as well.
Oh,
you know, I've just subscribed to Shudder. And it's like, oh, all these old horror movies I love. So it's challenging, but yeah, I want to do more. It's just, you know, the only piece of writing advice that matters is just write, and it's the most simple, flippant thing to say, but it's the hardest bloody thing to follow. Because procrastination is so easy. And writing is hard. As a friend of mine who's a professional writer says, I don't like writing, I like having written. And I can totally understand that. When you're in the depths of it, it can be grueling. But once you finish something and you're pleased with it, and you've done the best you can and you've put it out there, that's a lovely feeling. That's really good. You know, you get a proper high from that. But writing is difficult, and it never gets easier either. In my experience, it always is a pain in the bum to some degree. But it's something, you know, as I'm sure you are, that you're compelled to write. You're compelled to tell stories because that's what you love doing. And you know, people do say write every day, and yes, absolutely, but don't beat yourselves up about it. You know, if you haven't written for a day, sometimes you're writing when you're not writing. Sometimes you're absorbing, you know, or you're noodling things over in your head. And self-care, you know, it's very important, and just kind of taking space to breathe. I know, you know, social media can be one of these things that are really annoying as a writer, because you'll log on in the morning and you'll see your best friend who's got like a 5-novel deal or whatever is like, I've written 2,500 words today. And you're like, oh, it's 9 o'clock only. And you think, I hate you. Just go away. But that's what they do. They, you know, those friends of mine do that. They're very successful writers. And, you know, it's, but it's not necessary. It can be, there's so much noise on social media about writing. It can be really hard to narrow down what's useful, and it can be a stick you use to beat yourself up, you know, in terms of, we were talking about that thing about confidence earlier. But don't, you know, it's easier said than done, but you know, you know what, when you're tired, sometimes it's not worth pushing, and it's okay occasionally to take a day off. But going back to what I just said, the way to write a book is to write a book. There is no easy way. You have to put in the effort. You have to put in the words, make a story, finish the story, you know, get it edited, etc. That's how you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, you know, I have toyed with the idea of writing a novel since I was like 6 years old. But why, why did why did I just get it done, recently, is because, I set a writing schedule for myself and I followed it, right? Like when that time came around, I wrote and it's amazing, right? Like if you actually put in,
that can be really helpful. Yeah.
If you put in the work. Yeah.
Well, my friend, and also a writer I've published, Derek Kernskin, who is a brilliant science fiction writer, Canadian science fiction writer. He really actually did help me in sort of getting back into writing a bit, because he'd say, just do 200 words a day. That's all you have to do, but just get those 200 words done. That's a really achievable goal. And often, if you found yourself doing 200 words, often that would turn into 500. Sometimes it would turn into 1,000, and it's interesting that even if you're just dirtying the page, as they say, even if you're just waffling, when you start building the momentum, things can start coming out. So that's the thing about writing. It's about building that momentum and getting the machine going. Yeah. And it is true that the more you write, the easier it will be to get the machine going. I know the next time I sit down to write, it's going to feel like, firing up an old Skoda from the 80s. It's going to backfire every 10 seconds. But eventually the machine will start working again. It's never dead.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, there were days when I just pushed out a few hundred words, but then towards the end of writing the novel, I hit, I think, 3,000 words in 3 hours one day.
Wow. That's incredible. That's very good going. Yes,
I know. Absolutely. It was an unbelievable day, right? Because I really got into the habit and really got into, really doing it. And now, of course, I've been out of the habit for a little bit and trying to do other business related things and do of my role playing game stuff. But I'm looking forward to kind of setting that up again and doing it again for the second one and seeing where it kind of goes from there. Well, Jonathan, I've had you on here for a long time. We're talking about all this stuff, but where can people, find your books, and where can they learn more about your editing and everything?
Yeah. So The Language of Beasts is available currently in hardback, shortly paperback. If folks point their browsers at blackshuckbooks.co.uk and take a look at collections, they'll find The Language of Beasts in there. They do ship abroad. When the paperback is published, I believe there'll be an ebook as well. So for people who want even more easily accessible books, there is that. In terms of my editing, my website is johnolivereditor, all one word, .co.uk, and you can find me and contact me through that. I am also on Readsy, which is the editing and writing service. You can find me there. And my Twitter handle, I'll just double check because I can never remember, even though I'm on Twitter quite a lot. You'd have thought I'd remember my own thing. It is at John Oliver Editor. And often people, I occasionally get followed by really famous people who mistake me for that other John Oliver. And that's always, think, wow, I'm being followed by someone from Hollywood. They must love my work. And then they unfollow you 2 seconds later. You're like, no, they think I'm that John Oliver. So I've made sure to change my Twitter bio to officially not that John Oliver since 1978. So.
Well, there you go. Yeah. And that other one doesn't need any press, so we don't have to mention. All right. Well, I will be sure in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com, I will be sure to add links to The Language of Beasts. I will put a link to your website and to your Twitter handle, and I'll make sure it's not the other one. And I will put those links in the show notes. So if anybody out there right now, if you're listening, you can head over to dicegeeks.com, check out the show notes for this episode, and you will find the links for The Language of Beasts and where to follow John on Twitter and all of that. Well, Jonathan, It was just a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. Really
thank you so much.
Thanks. No problem. Thank you.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my discussion with Jonathan today. I know we touched on a lot of topics around writing, publishing, and got on a few tangents, but I had a blast talking to him. I learned a lot about writing from the publishing kind of side of things when he was a commissioning editor. I really enjoyed those stories. Also, it is always cool to talk to somebody who enjoys playing Call of Cthulhu. So, as I mentioned in the show notes for this episode, I have included links to John's books, as well as his website and his Twitter. I greatly, greatly urge you to go check those out. You can find those show notes at dicegeeks.com. All right. If you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You get 10 free dungeon maps. You'll never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you will get an email update from me letting you know what is going on in the world of Dice Geeks. All right, guys, this is usually where I give the pitch, but I've been given the pitch at the front. Please like, rate, review, subscribe. All of that helps the show out, and I appreciate every one of you who is listening and would do one of those things or more of them to help out the show. As always, it is my privilege to come to you each and every Wednesday with a new interview and an exciting guest. So I thank you so much for listening, and until next Wednesday, keep gaming,